before with general reports as soon as the election killings took place about what happened. So this is not new. And this particular complaint, which now has the actual evidence, was prepared beginning a year ago, long before the anti-homosexuality bill. This is just an excuse by Museveni to try to undermine what we've done, which is to give true evidence of the crimes his administration commits. It has nothing to do with the anti-homosexuality bill. This was done this was put in place long before that. By the way, JB, if I could add one more thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes.
215 witness statements takes a long time to put together. This was done long before the anti-gay bill in Uganda.
So it's like this process has taken more than a year or more than 2 years?
This process, in terms of gathering the evidence, is a full years-long process. It took us a full year to put together this evidence. And people may wonder why it took us time, because 215 people had to be interviewed. They had to have their statements taken. They had to have them prepared. They had to go back to them. And remember, in Uganda, it's not always easy to get from one part of the country to another quickly. And so it took time to do, but it had to be done right. And that's the important thing. And that's why we took the time.
Talking about the 215 people, we all know that they are still in Uganda. They have given their testimonies. How sure are you that they will not change their statements, because some of them are still exposed to the same system? And are they insulated from the regime with brutal arm? And how secure are they? And by the way, how secure are you in this case?
Well, I guess we'll deal with me first. I'm an American lawyer. I live openly in Princeton, New Jersey. My address is known to the world. It's on all the papers. I think that the Museveni government would be very foolish if it did anything towards me. That would invoke immediate responses by the United States government, which is not going to stand for one of its citizens, particularly a lawyer, being attacked or threatened by frankly, a criminal regime abroad. So, JB, I feel very secure. And frankly, even if I didn't feel secure, I would do this work, because it's the threat of fear that lets dictators stay in power. So even if I felt threatened, I would still do this. And my wife actually is very supportive of this work. And, we move forward with this. So we're not going to sit in fear of General Museveni and his son. As far as the people in Uganda are concerned, remember, the ICC process is absolutely confidential. And the ICC never reveals the names of the people who come to it. And even when it comes to Uganda, if it does, to do the investigation, it doesn't tell the government who it's visiting. And so these individuals are protected, and their names will never be revealed to the government. And frankly, knowing the situation in Uganda over the last 2 years, the very fact that they came forward now tells me they're going to stick with their story no matter what, because they took courage to do what all of these people have done. And I believe they're going to stay that way, because they've come to recognize that the only way to fight a dictatorship is to come forward. And yes, there may be some people who are afraid, but when you're afraid and you come forward, that's when the dictator loses his power. His mystique is now gone. And by the way, the recent articles in the New York Times and the Guardian, the Daily Monitor, now your show, in which are directly talking about these charges, also demonstrates that the mystique of Museveni is disappearing fast, because people are not afraid any longer to speak out. And once that happens, the dictator's power goes away. And so I think these people are going to stand with their story. And I also don't think the Museveni government's going to threaten them anymore, because if they do, that confirms to the world what they've been doing. So I think we've seen a change now in the power of this government. Now that it's been exposed, it can't continue to do the things it's been doing.
Sorry for that.
That's okay.
Mr. Bruce, I'm very sure since you've been following Uganda's politics, it's not the first time ICC is handling a case involving similar occurrences. In 2016 and 2017, the Office of the Prosecutor of ICC, it received several petitions relating to the massacre of people of Kasese. But ICC concluded that those killings were not justifiable. And a number of petitions have been filed against Museveni's conduct, but the conclusions has always been in his favor. What gives you confidence this time around that you will succeed? Because some have tried and it's like they've failed. What gives you that confidence?
Well, remember, JB, I don't know that the court will take this case. I'm not telling people the court's going to take this case. I couldn't say that as a lawyer. But we have provided the evidence the court needs to take this case. As far as Kasese is concerned, the court said there was not evidence of a continuing pattern of illegality. It never said these killings were lawful. It said we can't find a pattern of wrongful conduct continuing onwards. See, the ICC doesn't investigate a single case. It looks for a pattern over time of criminal conduct. And that's what we have here. We have 215 people who say that over a period of 3 years, the same thing keeps happening. Abductions from the street, prison in SFC and chieftaincy of military intelligence centers, tortures that are identical in most cases. How many people have said they have chemicals in the eye? How many people have said they've been forced to dance for 12 hours until they fall down and then they're beaten when they fall? All of this is a pattern over 3 years. And that's what was missing, the ICC said, in the Kasese case. But here we have a pattern of plain torture and abduction by this government. So I don't know the court will take the case, but we have evidence that's different here than in the Kasese case. And by the way, the comment that many people have said, and Museveni and other leaders in Africa say, that the ICC unfairly targets Africa. I know it's on a list of subjects. If you don't mind, let me get into that if I can.
Yeah, please continue.
The ICC investigates Africa because Africa is the place where dictators are harming their people. Africa is the place where these leaders are committing crimes against humanity. Now, China does, but China's not in the court. But African countries are within the court. They all sign the court statute. And Africa is the place where most of these brutal dictatorships still exist. And the ICC is not prejudiced against Africans. When the ICC investigates an African dictator, it's trying to protect African people. The ICC exists to protect the people of Africa from crimes against humanity. So the ICC is not racist when it investigates. It's trying to protect people in Africa from dictators in Africa. And that's the important point that needs to be understood. It's Museveni who harms the African people in Uganda, and it's Museveni and his colleagues in Africa who harm African people. And the ICC exists to put a brake on that and stop it. So it's not racist when the ICC investigates African leaders. The ICC is doing its job to protect the people of this continent.
Actually, Museveni refers to ICC as an instrument of Western imperialism targeting African leaders. That's what he calls it. About the case still, because I'm very sure this has excited very many Ugandans in Uganda and outside Uganda. How can those very, very concerned, not actually only Ugandans, but those outside Uganda's borders, help in this case? How can they render help?
Well, you know, one of the purposes of this case is to give people courage. It's to give Ugandans, wherever they are, and other people who live under these types of governments, courage. And once we go to the court and we expose what has happened, it makes people feel stronger. So in one sense, it doesn't even matter what the court does a year or two from now. Right now, we've given courage to people. And that's an important part of challenging a dictatorship. So I would say that people who live outside of Uganda need to work with people in Uganda. They need to gather their stories, talk to people in Uganda who've been abused, and let us know, contact us. I'm an open book. Everyone knows how to find me. Let me know what those people have experienced so we can get new affidavits and new witness statements. So the people outside of Uganda can uniquely communicate with those inside. And also, people outside Uganda can speak to me, tell me what stories they've had personally, because that may help us. So that's one thing to do. And, I think people in Uganda need to begin to have moral courage and not be afraid any longer. Because now that we've exposed the regime, it's much safer for people to speak their minds. Look what's happened in the Daily Monitor this week. Front pages exposing these crimes. Your show will go out to many, many people in Uganda. And so people now can see that the regime's on the defensive. It can't arrest people on the streets randomly anymore. It can't shoot people down because now the world is watching, because the ICC process puts this government under the microscope. And so I think that people now in Uganda too can begin to speak openly, because this regime no longer has the freedom to persecute as it did a week ago. Now that it's been exposed, it can't continue to abduct, it can't continue to torture, it can't continue to murder, because now the world is watching.
But that fear has actually been one of the limiting factor, and it's because of the nature of Museveni and his regime. And on that line still, is there a concern, for example, Museveni and his son, given their well influence and the connections world over, is there a possibility for them to exert pressure on certain board members at the ICC to influence the final decision in this case, something like that? I
don't think Museveni and his son have any world influence. President Biden refuses to meet with Museveni individually. Museveni was lucky to get a 5-second picture at the summit meeting a few months ago with Biden. Every leader stood for 5 seconds with Biden and had their picture taken. That's all Museveni got. He didn't get a meeting. Many years ago, he was in the Oval Office in Washington. Museveni is now persona non grata. The United States still works with him militarily, but he personally has no influence. And his son has no influence. His son is now targeted as someone who's leading these torture centers. So I don't think there's any danger that the ICC board is going to listen to Museveni or Muhoozi. I don't think there's the slightest danger of that at all. And I think that one should not think that this man has real influence in the world anymore. These reports that we filed have discredited whatever was left of their reputation. And the fact is, and JB, this is really important. You asked me earlier about Museveni's claims that this is all in response to the anti-homosexuality bill. Yeah. Well, that's all he says. He doesn't deny the torture. He doesn't deny the abductions. He doesn't deny the crimes against humanity. So all he says is, well, this is because we filed they're making this case because of the bill against gay rights. But he never denies the torture, never denies all those thousands of abductions, never denies the corruption of the judicial system. He never denies any of this. And that's very important because he can't deny it. There are too many thousands of witnesses, and now 215 have gone on record. So I don't think Museveni and his son have influence in the world, in the ICC, the World Court, or anywhere else like that. I think the world tolerates them, but there's no influence.
As we wind up the show, I want you to walk us through from the perspective of the average Ugandan, the common Ugandan. What would it mean if Museveni and his son are ultimately found guilty by the ICC? I want you to walk us through the steps that can be taken to enforce the ICC ruling.
Yes, if I was some time away from that. The ICC has to investigate, it has to make its decision, it has to hold a trial. But if they are found guilty or even indicted, charged with a crime, they instantaneously lose all ability to work internationally with all leaders. They can never again leave Uganda for fear of being arrested as soon as they step outside of Uganda. And they will have no ability to play any role in the world. Once a leader is indicted by the ICC, they instantly lose all credibility as leaders, as governors, as politicians. No foreign government will deal with an indicted leader who's charged by the ICC. And so if that should happen, Museveni and his son lose all credibility. Already, I think Muhoozi has lost the ability to succeed his father, because 4 of our witnesses have stated on the record under oath that he was running the torture centers, and he called them in to meet with them and threatened them at these centers. So already Muhoozi can no longer succeed as president. He has no credibility. And by the way, the NRM now can look at these charges and say, we no longer have confidence in this leader. And believe it or not, JB, dictatorships often fall simply because the truth is exposed. And even their own supporters back away. There's one point I'd like to add before you close, JB, if I can.
Please continue.
Thank you. We've named 26 officials as people who've committed these crimes or allowed them to go on and could have stopped them. But let me say this, it takes hundreds and thousands of police officers and soldiers to make these crimes happen. Every soldier, every police officer, every army officer has a choice whether to abduct someone from the street, whether to torture, whether to beat, whether to bring them to a prison illegally. And every police officer and soldier and officer takes an oath to Uganda to protect the people of Uganda. That oath is not to General Museveni. That oath is to protect the people of Uganda and to respect the law. And that's what soldiers and police and their officers must do. And we hope they will do that. We expect them to do that because they need to look their own children in the eye and their own parents and their own aunts and uncles and say that they've acted honorably. But I will say this. We have now identified suspects to the ICC. Every time an abduction takes place, we know who did it. We know what officers do this. And we are watching. And we will gather that evidence. And we will report their names to the ICC. So the police and the army need to say to their leaders, no, we will not abduct. We will not torture. We will not harm our fellow citizen. And meet their oath of office. But those who do, we're watching. And just like 26 names have been reported, other names will be reported. So the police and the soldiers of Uganda have a choice. Obey our oaths, protect the people, or if we abduct and torture, our names will go to the ICC. And I want people to understand that the time has come to resist these demands to hurt the people of this country.
Something else which has come up my mind right now. Doesn't it warranty automatic sanctioning of these people due to the fact that they have been presented to the ICC?
I couldn't quite hear you, JB. Could you say that again?
Doesn't it dragging these people to the ICC automatically warranties them being sanctioned?
It's not automatic, JB, but what it does is it creates a problem for anyone who's reported to the court. They'll never know when they're indicted. And they won't be able to safely leave Uganda. Because if they're indicted and they travel to London or the US or Canada or Germany, they'll be arrested. And so those who get on a list of suspects will never know when the court has indicted them, and they can no longer safely leave Uganda. And eventually, I will point out, there'll be a change of government in Uganda. Remember in East Germany, the communists were there for 30, 40 years? Well, when the communists left power, the new governments prosecuted the soldiers who tortured and killed German citizens. And eventually there'll be a change of government in Uganda. Whether it's Bobby Wine or some other Democrat, there'll be a change. And those who commit these crimes will be held accountable by the prosecutors in those new governments. So there's no free lunch. If you're a soldier, you're an officer, you're a police officer, and you commit these crimes, there's a day of reckoning when you're held accountable. And every time a dictatorship falls, those who committed these acts of torture and abuse end up in the dock, whether it's at the ICC or in the courts of Uganda under a democratic government. Accountability will be had. And that's why it's so important for the police and the army in Uganda to obey the law and to say no to torture and no to abduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bruce. What is your final message to Ugandans out there?
My message is that the law exists to protect people, and that people in Uganda are entitled to the protection of Uganda law and international law. And do not be afraid any longer to speak your mind. This government can no longer round you up at a protest. It can no longer gun people down, because every time it does that, the world is watching. So to the people of Uganda, you can now assert your rights much more safely than in the past. And unless you do that, all of my work and all of our work here will be for nothing. The people of Uganda have got to come forward now and protest and demand democracy. Otherwise, everything we do here will not help them.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce Afrant. It has been a pleasure having you this afternoon. Till next time.
Thank you, JB. It's a pleasure.